I am Diana Joseph. I teach at Minnesota State Mankato. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white woman with brown hair, wearing red glasses and a black sweater. So I just want to welcome you all and thank you for attending our first community of practice. As a quick run through of our meeting objectives, we're just working on getting to know each other and hopefully coming together as colleagues. We are going to share the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Ed Consortium, otherwise known as MIHEC, their vision for inclusive higher ed in the state of Minnesota. We'll be taking a look at Think College's Inclusive Higher Ed Education Framework, and we'll end the meeting with an invitation to you all to collaborate with us and talk about next steps and what future meetings might look like. Before we go on, I want to let you know a few things about best practices for running an inclusive meeting. So as we move through the slides, you'll see that some have an image on them. What we will do is describe what that image looks like. We will also have closed captioning available for anyone who might need it. And if you have any accessibility needs, please go ahead and drop those in the chat and we'll get you set up. So it looks like a few more people have wandered in, but, welcome to everyone. And then Mary, if you want to hit that next slide, we'll do our land acknowledgement. So in Minnesota, we are standing on Minnesota Makoche, the rightful homelands of the 4 Dakota Oyate nations, the 7 Anishinaabe nations, and other indigenous people. We recognize that the U.S. did not uphold its end of the land treaties. It is the current and continued displacement of the Dakota Oyate, the Anishinaabe, and other indigenous people that allows the state of Minnesota to exist today. So if you want to do next slides. Thank you. We'll also do an affirmation of our commitment at the Institute on Community Integration. We affirm our commitment to address systemic racism, ableism, and all other inequalities and forms of oppression to ensure inclusive communities. And then I'll toss it over to Mary.
Thank you, Diana. This is Mary. I'm a Caucasian woman with dark brown hair and wearing a white blouse with a zebra design and have a bookshelf behind me. MIHEC has a vision for the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Education Consortium to build, enhance, and sustain initiatives that offer high quality inclusive higher education based on best practices that are accessible to Minnesota students with intellectual disabilities from all geographic, social, economic, ethnic, cultural, linguistic backgrounds. We're poised to partner with institutions of higher education and widen the pathway for Minnesotans with intellectual disabilities who want to attend college. Inclusive higher education is a viable and legitimate pathway to and through higher education for students with intellectual disabilities. Institution-approved access allows for the same rights, privileges, experiences, benefits, and outcomes as a matriculating student by removing barriers. Inclusive higher education opens doors to earning meaningful credentials, pursuing a career of choice, earning a competitive wage, and living a fulfilling and independent life. And now I'll turn it over to Annette.
Sure. So we just wanted to start straight in with a documentary of inclusive higher education so that everybody can get a glimpse of what best practice can look like. And this is a documentary filmed by Dan Habib, who's a documentarian who covers inclusive higher education as well as inclusive practices in the K-12 settings. And it just gives us a glimpse into 2 colleges, Millersville and Temple U, and the students with intellectual disabilities who are going to college. And we'll just see a short clip from the film And as you watch this, we want you just to take notes of the ways that students with intellectual disabilities are genuine members of their campus communities. So enjoy. And we'll put a link to this in the chat as well. Diana, are you hearing anything?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think, Mary, we're having a little trouble with the sound.
With intellectual disability that leads
There we
to meaningful employment opportunities. This film shows how inclusive higher
Education creates a sense of belonging for students like Missy, Curtis, Janet, and Fadia. Title: Opening Doors to College. A film by Dan Habib. Two swans float across a pond. Title: Millersville University, Millersville, Pennsylvania. In a classroom.
From a professional and a human perspective, the most important thing I think for social workers is to understand, well, what does that mean to you? But we also have to recognize that this is happening in this greater context of things where there's those social injustice, where people have been put in boxes, where sweeping generalizations about populations have been made. Does that make sense? Does that sound about
A
right?
couple students smile.
All right.
One goes to her dorm with her roommate.
This is your Facebook?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And
I think I saw your profile on my Facebook. You're beautiful in this picture.
Thank you.
Absolutely stunning.
She wears a prom dress.
Oh, someone's angry.
Later, she's in a common room.
Hi, Missy.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Missy sits at her laptop.
What are we working on today?
Missy Jackson, Millersville student, Integrated Studies.
Homework.
Mark Masoner, student, educational support coach.
I have homework too.
When we started this program, I had a professor call me on the phone and said, there is no place at this university for people with intellectual disability.
Thomas J. Newville,
I said, do you know that a little over 100 years ago, your peers said there's no place at this university for women, or people who are African American, or people who are Latino, or people who have physical disabilities? We've been segregating people a long time, and it has not worked. Maybe we should try something else.
in a lecture hall.
Do you like that clean acoustic guitar sound? It's a thin texture, right? And it makes the
Director of
voices
Integrated
really
Studies,
stand
Jan
out.
Bechtel.
Integrated Studies is a fully inclusive initiative for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to come and have a fully inclusive college experience. So that's everything from academics, social, residential, and personal well-being.
But
A man
you
speaks
need
to Missy in an office.
The program's been in existence since 2014. We started with 1 student, and now we have 16.
What have you successfully overcome,
In another of Missy's classes,
right?
Bechtel.
Integrated Studies students also work on vocational career exploration and building relationships. So it helps them grow as individuals and also in terms of their career and their future. They're admitted as full-time non-degree seeking students. They receive a university-approved certificate. It's a meaningful credential and it's modeled right after our own Millersville University diploma.
In another lecture hall,
All right, excellent. Okay, what other call to action might there be? Yeah.
The developmental upgrades of NFL equipment for player safety.
Okay, the use of it.
Professor
All right,
Victor Capici.
So let's frame it this way. To mandate the use of more protective equipment in football. I'm rephrasing it a little bit. Does that make sense? So
Integrated
that
Studies
might be
student Curtis
another
Ostrowski nods.
Call to action.
Curtis.
My aunt texted my mom about this program, and as soon as I got that message, I put my laptop down, rushed to the library, and got everything I needed to apply.
Theo Brady.
When people say college is not for students with intellectual disability, then you're going to continue to oppress.
Adjunct Professor, Disability Studies.
We got to be very intentional about basic civil rights. Everyone needs an opportunity to participate. We need to open doors instead of close doors. That means a little bit more investment of your time as a professor. That's what we do with any student.
Missy opens the door.
In the Deep South, white America oppressed Black America.
In class,
Separate schools, separate classrooms.
she listens with other students.
You have those kind of traditions and customs that you think is okay because you see it every day, you got used to it. But all along, it was oppressive. And that's the same thing happened today with disability.
She walks down a hall.
Because I didn't get my homework. No.
She reads a note on a door.
So I just like,
She sits in a chair nearby.
I'm not coming back to eat high. I should go to college so I can go and get homework and start going. So I go look at the new teachers.
Bechtel.
Missy has, in her time here so far, developed a great deal in her self-advocacy. When she first came, she was really reluctant to talk. There were some students on campus that would call her names and things, and I think that made her go more inward.
Professor Onek Adianga.
Missy has a bit of challenges speaking, but that should not detract from the fact that she has a mind of her own. She can try, as difficult as it is, to express herself. There's nothing more important than bringing a perspective of the world based of your education in society.
Not me.
In a gym, Curtis walks on a treadmill.
Ostrowski is a very, very brilliant person. When he got out of his shell, Ostrowski became one of the most vocal students in the classroom.
Title: Curtis drops in to see his former professor, Onek Adianga, during office hours.
Hey. Come in, come in. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you very much. Yeah, registration is coming. Have you decided on courses you'll be taking?
I picked out one so far.
Which one is that?
Psychology.
Psychology. Yeah. Ah, okay. Have you spoken with the professor?
No, not yet.
Find time, talk to the professor.
I'm definitely coming back here.
Anytime, man, anytime. I'll always love to see you.
Man, as I was walking down the hall, I was like, oh man, I'm seeing Onek. Because you had confidence in me.
You remember what I told you earlier? Anything that you want to do, you can do it. Do not let anybody tell you that you can't. In this world, it's the effort that you put into something, not what people tell you.
Think of how we could have lost that voice.
All right. And I just wanted to say this is Annette, and I am a white woman with blonde hair, with a pink sweater. And what we want to do right now is give you an opportunity to respond and introduce yourself and get to know you better. So we're going to go into breakout rooms to discuss a little bit about what brings you here, and even just some of your reactions to opening doors to college. So Mary's going to go ahead and put us into breakout rooms. We're excited to get know you on a little more personal basis, and that'll be about 5 minutes of our time is going to be within that breakout room.
And I've got a few that Esther and Avery and I will stay here if that's okay. Just in case other people join. We were going to break it up into 3 different groups. So welcome. We're just so excited that that you're able to join us and are interested. Let's see. We had some questions. Let me drop those in the chat if that's okay. One of the questions that we had, or just as a way of introducing yourself, is that, what brought you to come to the community of practice? What interested you?
Do you want us to just speak up, or do you? Want
Yeah. This is more of just kind of a dialogue amongst us.
Okay. My name is Esther Wang, and I'm sorry I was a little late. And I teach at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota. And I'm a musician. I teach piano, and I teach a class for music for a change. And it has to do with social change. Listening to music is a different way of hearing and seeing and acknowledging things. And I'm the faculty associate for DEI here. And I'm learning a lot. This is only my second year, and it's only a 3-year stint, but there's, every time I look at a video, every time I hear somebody talk, every time I see something that's new on a PowerPoint that, oh my God, I didn't know that they could write, they could write down what I'm saying as soon as I say it. How did that happen? So there are all these, like really great things that I'm learning. And I hope that we can get more students here with challenges. And I'm hoping that it's not just, it's not just a kind of person that comes here. They're just all kinds of people that come here. So I'm excited about that.
My name is Avery. I am the Accessibility Services Coordinator for St. Cloud Technical Community College. And pretty much the reason I'm here is because this is kind of like what I do, you know what I mean? And I think that anytime we have an opportunity to learn and hear from other people, specifically about things that we take action on every day, I work with students with disabilities every single day. So knowing that, there are people out there that also want to make sure that these students are successful, and hearing other people's perspectives, and even things like that documentary, which I might not have been exposed to otherwise, is part of the reason why I'm here.
Great. Yeah. And I am a parent and have been an advocate and involved in advocating in various ways for inclusive higher ed for over 10 years here in Minnesota, and specifically helping get MyHEC started because we saw a need, there's a gap, and there just wasn't as much movement here in Minnesota. And so we're trying to bring all the key stakeholders together and get some positive momentum to expand higher education or post-secondary education opportunities for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So, you kind of answered the second question that we had was sort of about prior knowledge. I don't know if that's something that you would like to share a little bit.
I mean, I I got my master's degree in rehabilitation counseling, and I worked in higher ed for, I've been in higher ed since I was 16. And as a person with a disability, for me, it was seeing the gaps of, there's not enough education about making sure there's disability supports for any student with any kind of disability, and then you have people who are, maybe they have a disability, but they aren't as disabled as they think they should be in order to get those supports, and, really demystifying, destigmatizing, like disability services or accessibility services, or even just college in general as something that you have to be X, Y, and Z ready for, is a big part of what I've done since I was, a tour guide when I was 17 years old and, doing PSEO, right? So
yeah,
that's me, and that's kind of my experience and why I'm here.
Yeah. The other question that we didn't get a chance was just simply about how in DEI initiatives, why disability sometimes is often excluded or really not part of that. So everybody's coming back, so that's good. So I think people will be coming back in the next 30 seconds, and then we'll continue on.
All right, this is Annette. I hope everyone had a great time introducing yourselves and just getting to know each other a little bit better, and sharing what brought you here. We're so excited to have you here, by the way, and we're just super pumped to see things moving within the state of Minnesota. And so with that, I'd love to go to the map that just shows college options for students with intellectual disability. And one of the things I'd like to point out is the inclusive post-secondary programs that we're talking about today, and within this consortium, is going to be for students with intellectual disabilities, and for students who may not be able to access college in a typical manner. And so I just wanted to make that distinction. And these are college options right now across the country. It's a national movement for students with intellectual disability. And you just take a moment to look at it. We're going to give you links to all of these images that we're seeing. And what you're seeing in front of you is a map of the United States, and it's entitled College Options for Students with Intellectual Disability as of September 2022. And the total number of programs is 312 programs. This has been growing since about 2009. And within the state of Minnesota, there are 4. But to compare that to New York, where you see 29 programs, or even Pennsylvania, where there are 20, or Florida, where there are 28 programs, Minnesota currently has 4 initiatives that are being offered for students with intellectual disabilities. And I'd like to just also note that those may or may not be inclusive options. So what you're seeing there, but we will give you a link to that map. Another thing that I want to take us to is within the next slide, and there's some text on this slide, and I'd like to just put that into perspective, because again, we're advocating for expanding Minnesota's college options for students with an intellectual disability. And we know that post-secondary education does positively impact adult outcomes for students with and without disabilities. And for such things, first of all, is access and equity to the college space and to the post-secondary space is really what's most important. And also looking at some of the other benefits, such as higher rates of employment. You can have increased earnings regardless of disability status. There's a lot of data that's coming in, because again, many of these initiatives have been starting since 2009. We're starting to see a lot of data that's coming in that overwhelmingly supports college options for students with intellectual disabilities. And with that, just knowing that Minnesotans who have an intellectual disability need that access to post-secondary education as a pathway, both to employment, but also with the mind of access and equity. And we know that actually less than 3%, right now with those 4 initiatives, less than 3% of Minnesota students with an intellectual disability have access to post-secondary education. So I know that an individual within our group was sharing that they have a loved one who they'd love to have that access, but less than 3%. There are approximately 1,000 students per year who are graduating from Minnesota high schools, which means right now there are 5,000 college-age Minnesotans with intellectual disability, 5,000. And currently, again, only 4 initiatives with very small program sizes. And so the idea is that we want to have the opportunity for students with intellectual disability to have access to and have choices that best fit their college options. So that could include proximity to home is something that's really important to people, academic interests. You could look at maybe even their certificates or the degrees that are offered, even campus housing options. And cost is another important factor for many families. And so we would love to start expanding from, again, 4 initiatives, which may or may not be an inclusive space, to really giving students and families the choice to where they can really experience that access and equity within the post-secondary setting. And I'd love to go on to this next slide just to give you an idea. So yes, on intellectual disability. That is, MEHEC is it is the least, yes, definitely the least served population of students with disabilities within the United States, but definitely within the state of Minnesota. And so you may or may not be familiar with this already, but if not, we just kind of wanted to give an opportunity to give a brief overview of sort of what's happening nationally so that you can understand where we're at. And again, I talked about really a lot of this movement started in 2008, 2009. And the gateway to inclusive higher education really was in 2008 with the Higher Education Opportunity Act. And this created the opportunity to really expand college options for students with ID, even if they didn't have a high school diploma or a GED, and even if they were not pursuing a degree or a certificate. And so Congress, what they did within that Higher Education Opportunity Act included provisions that allowed students with an intellectual disability who enrolled at a college or a university within what's called CTP, a comprehensive transition and post-secondary designation, to be eligible to apply for federal financial aid, just like typical peers. And college and universities are able to apply for that CTP designation from the U.S. Department of Education. And that's really what can start opening things up for many students with ID. In Minnesota, students with ID who have attended a college or who attend a college or university with that designation are also eligible for state-based grants, scholarships, such as like the MnState grant and even Minnesota Indian Scholarship. Those are just two examples that we'd love to include. And we're going to include a link within the chat as well, as far as some of the steps that students can follow. I'd also like to just point out that this can look different on different campuses. So it depends on a variety of academic advising. It could be structured curriculums. It could also require, students to participate maybe in no less than half-time, or it could be a focus with different academic components. Some opportunities and many opportunities include internships or even work-based training with peers who do not have a disability. And again, the key of what we're going to be meeting about and focusing on is that inclusive higher education piece. So what we're not looking for is for sort of a fully self-contained setting for students, but what we're looking for is actually fully inclusive within colleges and universities, and having that same access and again, equity for students with ID on college and university campuses. So just to lay that out. And with that, I'd just like to hand it over, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of what the principles are that are a piece of what inclusive higher education looks like, because again, because this has been happening for over a decade, it's really looking at what an evidence-based program or initiative would include. So we're going to talk a little bit about those principles because we think it's important as we're stepping in and kind of starting to work together as a team to look for what we should aim.
Thank you, Annette. This is Mary. On this slide is an image of Syracuse University webpage that has a photo of college students with and without an intellectual disability on campus. Well, the first guiding principle for inclusive higher education is alignment. The most inclusive options are embedded in existing college departments and systems. So if you think about not creating something that's new or different on a campus, but just widening the path so that you're including students with an intellectual disability. So the initiatives are not separate from the university's policies and procedures, but actually included within. And always asking that guiding question of how is, whatever it might be, how is this done for other college students on this campus? The second principle of inclusive higher ed is collaboration. On this slide is a image of a group of 9 people who are key stakeholders meeting and collaborating on a Zoom call to expand inclusive higher education in Minnesota. One of the essentials of initiatives is working relationships and collaboration. it's essential, not only in terms of on the campus or within the campus community, but also within the key stakeholders or around key stakeholders that are outside of the university, including employers, state agencies, et cetera. And MyHEC, in our role in terms of providing technical assistance and trying to bring together key stakeholders, that's exactly what we're doing, is strengthening those relationships and the collaboration, and including stakeholders like students and families, state agencies, nonprofits, as well as the universities and colleges. The third principle is sustainability. And on this slide is a calculator, pen, glasses, pie chart, and budget spreadsheet photo. It's really important to be intentional about widening that pathway to include students with intellectual disabilities and utilizing existing university systems and services. We know in higher education, change is slow. And one of the lessons learned from a lot of universities across the country is to take your time and do it right from the beginning. That's really important to right size your student enrollment and staffing and match that up and scale it up over time. One of the key takeaways and recommendations in a lot of conversations that we've had from other universities and colleges is starting slow and small, and then aligning your initiative to leverage your college specific strengths, strengths in their areas in terms of the degrees or your where you're located, et cetera. And that helps again with sustainability. The fourth principle is evaluation. And on this slide is an image of the Think College annual report for the TIPSED model demonstration projects for the year of 2021. Not only does Think College gather data, and they do it specifically for the TIPSED grant recipients, but universities and colleges that have inclusive higher education initiatives on their campus are routinely gathering data and utilizing that to inform and instruct them in terms of how they're moving their initiative forward, as well as for reporting out, in terms of for recruitment and for families and for secondary educators, for some of the state agencies, for example, like Voc Rehab, that wants to know, what is that meaningful credential and how is this going to help a student achieve their job goals. So that's that continuous improvement is a really important component of inclusive higher education. Hope you need to turn your microphone on, Diana.
Eva had a question in the chat that I think might connect to evaluation. She asked if we could talk about the accountability that goes along with the post-secondary designation, I think CTP, and if these principles address that. Annette answered it, but I wondered if you wanted to say something too.
Sure. One thing that I would say is that the CTP designation is just that. It's a designation and it's minimum standards, Eva. And if you think about it as that's the access point for eligibility for federal financial aid. And then in Minnesota, it's also the gateway because Minnesota ties eligibility for some of the state aid based off of attending a Minnesota college or university with that CTP designation. We haven't touched on it, but there's also national accreditation standards, and we'll be providing some resources for you regarding that. Those have been published and released, and Think College is in the process of rolling those out and then figuring out the accreditation body that will be administering that. And that's down maybe a couple of years for that to be fully rolled out. And then what we're going over are the guiding principles, which are through all of the research and data, the best practices for inclusive higher education.
Right. I've read to think of the CTP as like the floor, not the ceiling. Right. And then these kind of like raise us higher. They raise all of the
Yeah. And the accreditation standards are like sort of are a layer up, if you will, from the CTP designation.
Yeah, it's a good question though. Yeah.
Does that help answer your question, Eva?
Yes, thank you.
Great. This is Diana. I'm gonna lead you through these next couple of slides. Principle 5 is about self-determination, and that the initiative supports the development of students' self-determination. I always like to stop and define terms. Self-determination is really all about having the autonomy to make decisions about your life instead of somebody else making those decisions for you or on your behalf. So in inclusive higher ed programs, a best practice is really beginning with person-centered planning. So here in the image, what you see is a college student who has Down syndrome. She is standing in front of her person-centered plan. What a person-centered plan is a way to identify what the students' dreams are, what their vision for their life after college might look like, and to identify a series of goals and action steps that'll help move them closer and closer toward living the life that looks like the life that they want. Using person-centered planning, coming up with opportunities to practice self-determination skills, and really letting the students' autonomy and personal preferences determine all aspects of their college education, including the level of involvement that family or other kinds of supports might have, the kinds of courses that they're taking, and the kinds of extra co-curriculars that they're participating in. If we want to move to the next slides. This is about the principle of academic access. So the post-secondary education initiative is supporting that inclusive academic access for students. What we're looking at is a slide from Temple University. This is an inclusive classroom where students with intellectual disabilities are learning right alongside peers who do not have intellectual disabilities. These are students who have access to any course that any other enrolled student would be able to take. So a wide variety of inclusive academic classes that come from different disciplines or different departments, different colleges, and that students can audit their courses. Some students might like to take their courses for credit. If they do, they're held to the same standards and assessment tools as any other enrolled student, or students also can have the option to audit their courses, in which case the student coordinates with someone from the program or the initiative staff and the professor to design alternative or modified assignments, to create a rubric that measures that student's learning potential and progress toward meeting their learning goals. What we would also really encourage y'all to do or think about is courses that are designed according to Universal Design for Learning. I just started building courses that use UDL as a framework, and that approach to learning is really good for everyone. It makes a huge difference for all students. So we can talk more about that too. And if you have a course that's built on UDL, those kinds of modifications or alternatives are probably not even going to be necessary. So if we can go to the next slide, and this is about the 7th principle, which is providing students with support and experiences necessary for seeking that competitive employment in integrated settings. So working with your career development centers so that students can take advantage of those services for things like career exploration, career development, learning about, creating their LinkedIn profile, learning about, fancifying their resume, doing internships in integrated work settings or work-based experiences, work-based learning, job shadowing, all of that really good stuff. And especially paid internships, because we find that paid employment really becomes a gateway for future paid employment. And having these kinds of internships really gives students an opportunity to see if the dream they have for their future career lines up with their experience of that career. And it's just a part of the typical college experience, is to figure out what it is you want to do and then to give it a spin through internships. So if we move to the next slide, this is about campus membership, which is making students authentic members of the campus. So, if we're talking about inclusive classes where there's no separate or segregated instruction, and inclusive work experiences, this is about inclusive engagement, inclusive participation, having access to all the same kind of social and enrichment opportunities that are available to any other enrolled student. This could range from living, if your university offers a residential living, if your university has student government, if your university has various clubs or activities or services, resources, anything that is available to any other enrolled student paying tuition, paying fees, is also available to students who are in this initiative. This is real important because this is also a way that friendships start to form, where students get to know each other and they hang out and they have some kind of shared interest. And it's I don't know, it's the right thing that students should do, be with each other and become friends. So this is an important part of your initiative. I think we're ready for whatever comes next. Oh, Mary, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. We'd like to, so that was just simply a quick run through in terms of the guiding principles of inclusive higher education, and wanted to really end the slides and move into discussion by just recapping that we're here in Minnesota, we're part of a national movement. And this map that's on this particular slide is showing states that are in different colors: red, orange, yellow, or green or gray. And they're all representing what's going on in that particular state. In Minnesota, we have proposed and passed legislation several years ago that established grant funding for students with intellectual disabilities who are attending a Minnesota CTP designated initiative. So that's a part of the financial aid. And we have also done some other legislative proposals. One was last year, we proposed the Minnesota Inclusive Higher Education Act. And on this slide is an image of a self-advocate, an individual with Down syndrome, and other adults that were advocating for inclusive higher education in Minnesota. We did propose legislation last year that really had two components to it. It established grant funding for Minnesota institutions of higher education to really for initial funding for their initiatives on their campuses, as well as creating and funding a technical assistance center to provide that follow along support and meeting the different universities and colleges where they're at to be able to expand to include students with intellectual disabilities on their campus. In the chat, we'll put a couple of links. One, if you'd like to stay current on what is happening, we partner with the ARC of Minnesota and Minnesota Council on Disability and some other different nonprofits on the public policy side. And we will be reintroducing the proposed legislation this session and hope that we can get that passed through. The second link that we'll share with you is a one pager for inclusive higher education, which is basically a summary of the legislation and the issue that you could take a look at, share it with your legislators. We will be refreshing that for the 2023 legislative session before the end of the year or beginning of January.
All right, this is Annette. So we've been working together over the last months, the three of us, as well as some other individuals across Minnesota, and we're just really passionate about seeing inclusive higher education happen in Minnesota for students with intellectual disabilities. And what we want is all of you to come on board and to be our be part of all of this excitement that's happening. And really what we're envisioning, for this consortium is for us to come together and just drive one another but also support one another and come for a place of questions and ideas. And here's what we're doing over here. That's really cool. What do you think about this? And just having this space for those of us that are really passionate about this happening across the state. And what we wanted to do, we know that there was just a lot that came at you. We tried to hold back as much as we could. And so it was a brief overview of a lot because we wanted to give everyone an idea of sort of the vision for inclusive higher ed. But we wanted to also give you a chance to ask some questions and also give your vision of how this group of individuals, all of us together, can best support you in the coming months and years, really. So now the floor is open to you. What are some questions that you have, or even ideas, or I'm sure there's many, but you can start with one. And even if you want to put them in the chat, that's great. Or you can also, I guess maybe we can even start with that. Well, if anybody doesn't, I think go ahead and put in the chat sort of what are your initial reflections on what you just saw, or even just within the last hour. What are some initial thoughts that you're having? I'd love to hear those. And feel free to also speak up if you prefer.
Oh, this is Eva. I'll just comment that I appreciate Mary providing some connection for me on talking to some folks about the disability justice series, because I noticed it within career and technical education. And of course, I'm one of the Office of Civil Rights Reviewers for our post-secondary two-year colleges, that people have acknowledged within their local plans for career and technical education that they're challenged with supporting students with disabilities as well as English language learners. And so this gives me an opportunity to kind of have some baseline discussions about disability justice and really how do we support students within career and technical education for the wide span of needs that students with disabilities may have, whether it's physical or intellectual, whatever those are. So this is really helpful. And it gives me some ideas for some baseline conversations to at least to start with. Lots of questions, so I'm absorbing it all, but thank you.
Thank you, Eva. It's great to have the partnership and so glad that you're able to join us today.
I had a question for Leanne. This is Eva speaking again. I had a question for, no, maybe it's Annette. Someone is a SPED coordinator at UMD. Can special ed?
Yeah, special
Okay.
education.
Okay. And Brian, I think, is looking at new programs specifically for students with disabilities. Can you speak a little bit more toward what it is you do? Is it special ed in terms of teacher education? Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
preparing pre-service teachers for inclusive settings to provide special education services to students with disabilities in our K-12 setting.
Okay.
So UMD offers a dual licensure in elementary and special education for undergraduates. And so that's what I'm here with. And then sort of concurrent with that, working with my colleagues to start an initiative for inclusive post-secondary higher education here at UMD as well. So Minnesota schools historically do not provide inclusive settings compared to the rest of the United States for students with disabilities. So just really looking to not only change that in the K-12 setting, but also looking to provide that opportunity for inclusive post-secondary ed here in our Northland region, and also partnering with other institutions who are moving toward that end as well within the area.
And that'll be really interesting because when I think about work-based learning as one example for students, either career technical education is geared toward just that population, or or students with disabilities are excluded from those work-based learning. I mean, it's just kind of a big spectrum of how students are participating in those opportunities to gain these kinds of relevant skills to the workplace and exploring what those career options are. So it'll be interesting about how do we incorporate those discussions and that preparation for within special education programs for new teachers. I'm not saying that right. I'm a little tongue-tied, but I was interested too about Brian. Is this a program that's being started for students with disabilities, or are you talking about teacher education? I wasn't quite sure.
Hi, yeah, like Annette said, we're at St. Cloud State, so I teach pre-service teachers as well in the Department of Special Education, but we are also starting a program for people with disabilities, similar to the programming that we've been discussing here. So to answer your question, both.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for your question. That's all good questions. So for a lot of students with intellectual disabilities, there's a different admission process. Generally, they are earning certificates as opposed to a 2 or a 4-year degree. And so it just depends how the university sets that up in terms of their own particular initiative, because there is a range of how, what that can look like. For the most part, students with intellectual disabilities are being admitted and then working towards certificates.
Thank you.
And just to ditto what Avery said, yes, it's so important that this is person and advocate centered, all initiatives, that we're not making decisions for, individuals with intellectual disabilities, but that they would be an integral part of the entire process across every institution, and that it's not some sort of infantilized, like father knows best type of scenario, but really saying like, this is something that we're all doing in partnership, and how can we create the most inclusive and equitable spaces across, our institutes of higher ed. So 100% Avery, all in agreement. Yes.
And to go a step farther, in terms of the consortium, students are an integral part of our organization and a key stakeholder. For example, we worked with a number of students with intellectual disabilities that participated in the public policy and helped either submit written testimony or testified in the higher education committees at the state legislature. And we will plan to do that as well. And then as we grow and develop in terms of establishing the consortium and the Technical Assistance Center, part of the leadership and advisory will be students with intellectual disabilities.
This is Eva speaking again. I just had a question when you mentioned public policy. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't it MyHEC that hosted a public policy forum with a speaker that was talking about supporting students with disabilities, or am I mistaken? Because I know there was one just recently, and I was trying to find out if the recording was going to be available for me.
Could you repeat the question? What was it? I was having a hard time.
The question, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was up. There was a public policy forum in which someone was speaking about supporting students with disabilities. I can't remember if that was MyHEC that hosted that. Maybe I'm getting the organization mixed up.
We had our September Learning Community event.
Yes.
And it was about public policy. Absolutely. We record those meetings, and then once we go through some editing and some things relative to accessibility.
Yes.
I know the recording is finished, and we're just waiting for the other resources, and that'll all get posted on the MyHEC website.
Okay, thank you. And can you put that link in the chat so I can just remember?
You bet.
And we're also going to be sending out a sort of a takeaway document that has all of the links that we used within this session today. So we would, it's something that we feel is really important, is that you're able to go straight to the source. And even looking at a map that includes some different programs across the United, or initiatives across the United States. So we're super excited to share all of that. But
yeah, the other thing is that there is a national conference, the State of the Art Conference, that's coming up in October. It's at Syracuse University. They generally are hosting it with George Mason University. And then concurrently is what they call the Student Leadership Conference, which is specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I know that Diana and I are planning to attend. My daughter is also planning to go and be part of the Student Leadership Conference. And our November Learning Community event for MyHEC will, hopefully there'll be other people from Minnesota, and we'll be bringing some of the resources and key takeaways and sharing those at the November Learning Community event. Does anybody else have questions or things they'd like to just share as we kind of keep moving forward? We're just so excited to be at this point and welcoming people together for the community of practice and having this get started.